March 1918, a steel ship over 500 feet long, on board roughly 300 people. And then suddenly, nothing. Not a body, not a lifeboat, not a single plank floating, not one distress call. What happened to the USS Cyclops and every man aboard her? It's the question the US Navy has failed to answer for more than a century. More than 100 years later, the Navy still classifies the disappearance as unsolved. According to its own history museum, the official records offer no explanation for what happened to the enormous ship. And wait, because when investigators started pulling the thread, what they found was even stranger. The captain wasn't who he claimed to be. The ship was overloaded, with a broken engine. And decades later, 2 of her sister ships would vanish in exactly the same way. But let's take it in order. The USS Cyclops was a giant for her time, a Proteus-class collier built by William Cramp and Sons in Philadelphia for the US Navy. She was named for the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of Greek mythology. Her job was unglamorous but vital. In the early 20th century, naval warships ran on coal, not oil. Ships like battleships depended on colliers like this one to keep sailing. In January 1918, with America now fully in the First World War, she was handed a long mission. The Cyclops left Norfolk, Virginia in January 1918 for a voyage of almost 3 weeks, carrying nearly 10,000 tons of coal to Rio de Janeiro. She unloaded the coal in Brazil, and here comes the first detail that matters. Instead of returning empty, she was loaded with something else, something far heavier. In March 1918, the ship was given a new cargo, tons and tons of dense manganese ore used to make steel. And that detail, the manganese, is going to haunt this entire story. Because manganese isn't coal. It was the first time she'd carried it, a difficult cargo to handle, far denser than coal. If it isn't stowed properly, it tends to shift when the ship starts to roll, and the Cyclops had a history of severe rolling. A ship designed for coal, loaded to the brim with an ore twice as heavy. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out there were warning signs before she even sailed. Before leaving Rio, Commander Worley filed a report raising structural concerns. The starboard engine had a cracked cylinder and no longer worked. Even so, the inspection board that received the report told him to head for the United States anyway. One of 2 engines, broken, and a suspicion of overloading. She sailed for Baltimore with no planned stops, carrying the manganese ore. She was thought to be overloaded because her maximum capacity was 8,000 long tons. And she carried nearly 11,000. There's the first unsettling piece. But the ship hadn't sunk yet. What happened next complicates everything. Because in theory, she wasn't supposed to stop anywhere, and she stopped. She made an unscheduled call at Barbados because the waterline sat above the maximum load line, the plimsoll line, suggesting she was overloaded. Yet inquiries in Rio proved the ship had been loaded and secured correctly. Notice the contradiction. In Barbados, she looked dangerously overloaded, but in Rio they swore everything was in order. Who was right? In Barbados, something else happened, something that would later feed the darkest theories. The American consul, Brockholst Livingston, went aboard and was surprised when Captain Worley asked him for funds to complete the voyage. On March 4, 1918, the Cyclops weighed anchor and left Barbados bound for Baltimore. She sent a single radio message. Weather fair, all well. No one ever heard from her again. Weather fair, all well. The last known words of 300 men. And now the stakes rise, because what comes next doesn't add up. The ship was due in Baltimore on March 13th. She never appeared. Search vessels combed the area where she was last known to have been. No field of floating wreckage was ever found. No distress signal was ever received from the ship's radio operators. The total absence of physical evidence turned the Cyclops into an instant legend. Think about it. A 500-foot steel ship doesn't disappear leaving nothing. A shipwreck leaves oil, wood, life vests, bodies. The Cyclops left absolutely nothing. And this is where the theories begin, each one stranger than the last. The first, the most obvious in the middle of a world war. A German submarine. Numerous ships set out to locate the collier since it was thought a German U-boat had sunk her. Her wreck was never found, and the cause of her loss remains unknown. It sounds logical, but there's a huge problem. No German submarine reported attacking the Cyclops, and Germany never claimed responsibility. What's more, a sudden attack would likely have left debris, and none was found. So we rule out the submarine. Then what? Here the story turns personal and sinister, because investigators began looking at the captain, and what they found didn't fit anything. The ship's captain, Lieutenant Commander George Worley, was in fact Johann Friedrich Wichmann, and he had been born in Germany. The commander of an American ship in the middle of a war against Germany was hiding a German name and a German origin. An inquiry into his past revealed he was born in Germany, had deserted from a German ship as a young man, and that his closest associates had been German merchant captains. And he was not a well-loved man aboard. Worley was a ruthless officer who often humiliated his crew. He treated them so badly, he earned the nickname the Damned Dutchman. With all this, amid raging anti-German hysteria, the suspicion was inevitable. Had the captain handed his own ship to the enemy? Or had the crew, sick of him, mutinied? This is where we have to stop and be honest, because this is what separates rumor from fact. Although it was found that Worley had many of the command traits of captains like Ahab or Bligh, there was no evidence he was disloyal to the United States, and no evidence his crew had seriously considered mutiny. In other words, the captain was strange, tyrannical, German by birth. All true, but there is not a single piece of proof of treason or mutiny. Only suspicion. The enemy, ruled out. The captain, largely ruled out. That leaves us the most boring explanation, and probably the truest: the sea and the cargo. Reports indicate that on March 10th, the day after the Cyclops was supposedly sighted, a violent storm swept the area of the Virginia Capes. An overloaded ship with a dead engine, carrying an oar that shifts, caught in a storm. The researcher Kusher made a solid case that the Cyclops probably sank between Cape Hatteras and Cape Charles under a fierce gale that battered the east coast on the 9th and 10th of March. Between the furious winds and the high seas, her manganese cargo likely shifted, and the ship capsized and sank with no warning and no time to send an SOS. She rolled over all at once. She went to the bottom in seconds. That would explain the most chilling part of all: why there was no distress call, why there were no survivors, and now, the final detail, the one that raises the hairs on your neck. The Cyclops had sister ships, identical ships of the same class. And pay attention to what happened to them. 2 of the 3 Proteus sister ships, the Cyclops and the Nereus, also vanished without a trace while operating in or near the Caribbean during the First and Second World Wars, respectively. The Nereus was lost at sea after December 10, 1941, sailing from St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, along the very route where her sister ship, the USS Cyclops, had disappeared at the end of the First World War. 3 sister ships, the same design, the same kind of heavy ore cargo, the same waters, and all swallowed by the sea without a trace. Maybe it wasn't a submarine, maybe it wasn't a mutiny. Maybe the USS Cyclops and her sisters shared a fatal flaw in their very steel skeletons, waiting for the perfect storm. But the truth is that, more than 100 years later, no one knows for certain. The Cyclops remains the largest ship the Navy has ever lost, without leaving the slightest clue to her fate. 300 men, an enormous ship, and one last sentence hanging in the air forever. Weather fair, all well.